All right. Yes. Okay. And the control panel is the Russian Academy of Sciences. You see, so I was just turned on. Such a pleasure to chair this afternoon's presentation discussion. This is a continuation of yesterday's ANSO online open conference. Yesterday, we had a lot of interesting presentations, discussions, and in a general topic of the climate change in hotspot areas. And this afternoon, we'll concentrate on impact of climate change and solutions. And very pleased to be the chair as the executive director of ANSO. Our first speaker this afternoon is Neil Stenson. And Professor Neil Stenson is from the University of Oslo. I want to particularly know that he is a ANSO science ambassador. Yeah, I know that to be followed by a short video on news, on Professor.
Well, that's great. We finally managed to overcome modern technologies, and I apologize for a little technical hitch at the beginning of this session. So, I am an ANSO ambassador, and it is a great honor for me to serve in this role. I am a former president of the Norwegian Academy of Sciences, as well as the International Union of Biological Sciences. Today, I am going to tell you about unification of efforts in the study of climate change and biodiversity loss in the perspective of One Belt, One Road. Today, I will focus not only on the epidemic disease, but also on the problem of marine biodiversity. So, as my colleagues mentioned yesterday about the Three Poles Initiative, this is a further development of international cooperation, and it is actually an incredible platform for further international cooperation. As for Himalayan system, this is a very important in itself, but it is also connected with the South and North Poles, and it is certainly of additional competitive value, because we can compare both the land ecology and the marine ecology. Norway undoubtedly supports all these initiatives, and what can we offer as Norway? Our modest efforts are aimed at working in the Arctic. Our modest efforts are aimed at working in the Arctic and working in the North Pole area, and I am very pleased to note that we recently received a new research vessel, an icebreaker called the Crown Prince Haakko. This vessel will explore the waters of the North Pole using new technological solutions. Let me briefly touch on the ecological effect of global warming. So, what does this represent? Of course, the region you are in is most affected by this. Well, for example, we can observe this as a result of warming. Since there can be both positive and negative effects, in particular on cod, but again it depends on where you are. So, if you are in the southern part of the region, it will be a negative effect, but if you are in the northern part, it will be a positive effect. But we understand that in the south it becomes too warm, while in the north the temperature rises slightly to optimal. So the population of northern fish will increase, and of course it will be difficult to say what effect global warming has in general, because there are both direct and indirect effects. Direct effects, in particular direct, impact on various elements of the ecosystem, as I mentioned earlier. When the temperature rises, there will be a noticeable positive effect for young cod and herring in the north, which means active reproduction. The climate also affects zooplankton, because it is food for many marine species. At the same time, if the temperature decreases, it can have similar, but nevertheless opposite effects. So the effect is ambiguous. I have worked with many young scientists. We have published a lot of researches here about impact on capelin and other species. In addition, not the global warming causes some fish species to shift towards the poles. Look, they move about 40 kilometers every 10 years. That means 10 meters a day. And this is actually one of our projects that we conducted at the University of Oslo in Germany, in Norway, in Europe. I have proud to have been working for a long time in the joint marine research group with our Chinese colleagues, Professor Liu and his wonderful colleagues. And of course, this gives us a great opportunity to get a huge set of data. And thanks to this, we will learn a lot about the impact of global warming and climate change, both coastal and marine. This is everything I wanted to tell you about the marine component. Now I would like to focus your attention on diseases and epidemiology. I research long-term data about pox, dengue virus, and other diseases. Particularly, Chinese pox and dengue virus data can be used to model ecological niches, and that is basically the things we do. So, pox, as we all know, is a disease of the present, which changed our history from the Black Death time. Well, half of the population of Europe died from this disease, but it is as well a disease of the present. Here, take a look. We suppose that we have eradicated this, but look, there are red zones which show us the exact regions where regular plague outbreaks take place almost every year. Well, in some regions it's more pronounced, in some less. I have started to work on pox around 20 years ago. I began in Kazakhstan. We analyzed the golden data set from USSR and were monitoring this data because we knew that it was dry region of former USSR where plague was represented. And I was honored to work along with our Chinese colleagues. I also worked in Mongolia and Russia. We have investigated the nature of pox and we learned a lot from our research, but I have analyzed the eldest data from USSR during the period when I worked in Kazakhstan in natural behavior of this disease. Then we began the next research. It is not a research of pox in natural reservoir, but research of the population. Climate research is the most important things in investigating the dynamics of the pox outbreaks nature and population growth outbreaks. So, when we see that there is an origin population, in particular in Kazakhstan, and when population growth begins and stays on a stable high level during, let's say, several years, and is followed by a dry year, then the population of the host system will be obliterated. It will be reduced, which leads to the spill of pox bacteria on the human population, and it leads to a real catastrophe. As I mentioned earlier, I was privileged to have an opportunity to work side by side with our Chinese pox research colleagues, and it was very interesting because they are incredible, brilliant, smart specialists. And besides, we have observed a huge diversity of ecological systems and pox spreading patterns on the territory of China. And here are these systems. Please take a look. We observed different species that can act as a main host system in the different regions of China, and there, obviously, are different pox vector spreaders. There are three main vectors that spread pox bacteria from one individual to another. Same for animal and human species. And look how we see them in completely different ecological systems. So if you ask me, what will be the environmental impact of the climate change? The answer is, it depends on who you are and where you are. Alright, because of the incredible historical documents in China, I have an entire collection of the data documents, and some of them I have here in my office, and they are unique. We can imagine the map of China this way, where we can see
that has had infections over the years. And you see the data extend back to the middle of the 1800s, but actually it extends far more back than that. I've been fortunate to analyzed these data and published nice papers together with Chinese colleagues. This is sort of the dynamics if you take all China together. If you ask the question, is there a spatial structure in this data? Are different parts of China exhibiting a different dynamics? I've been working with this. At the bottom there, you see the publication that came out of that work. And if you ask the question, is there a spatial dynamics, spatial structure of this temporal dynamics? The answer is yes. And here you can see what the human plague data tells about the structure. If you compare that with the previous map I showed you, where we have the different plague foci in China as it is recorded today, you see a great similarity. That is the historic data. The historic data can be used for analyzing the effect of climate variation and other changes through history, which we have done. Again, together with Chinese colleagues, and you have a paper at the bottom here, those we have been. You don't need to go into detail in this graph, but what you have to do, what you should do, you should look at the northern part of China and the southern part of China. The response is very different. It's very different in the north than in the south. In the north, under the prevailing climate change, there will be more plague cases in the wildlife and among people in the north, and there will be fewer in southern part. So the effect depends on the ecological system. And this is the dynamics. It has an effect on the plant, on the rodents, on the flea. So it's a very complicated, like what I said, what I told you for the marine system. We have also looked upon the effect of biodiversity, rodent biodiversity. And again, we have published a paper together with Chinese colleagues. And again, we can understand the dynamic today by analyzing historical data. But I'm leaving China to some extent now. And I'm going back with a perspective on Europe. In Europe, there is the question whether plague came into Europe with the Black Death and stayed in Europe during the medieval period. Many people say so. We had a paper in 2015 where we indicated that, as a matter of fact, plague might have come in from Central Asia several times. That we found by looking at climatic variation, the historical data, and with an ecological perspective. By the way, plague as a species, Yersinia pestis, it became a new species 5,000 years ago. Then it spread from people to people by droplets. Somehow it came to Central Asia, and 3,000 years ago, it got a mutation, the genes, for being able to be spread from one individual to another by flea. So I claim, and more people claim, that plague came into Europe several times. We have studied using ancient DNA techniques. We have studied where plague are likely to have come from during the medieval period. And in the early part of the second pandemic, starting with the Black Death, plague seems to come with fur trades from the land of darkness, where you have the dark place there. That's where it came from, a reservoir, just in the neighborhood of China. Later on, in the 17th century, 1700s, it came more from Turkey, Georgia, into Europe. There is no more plague, human plague, in Europe anymore. Most likely, because there is no plague reservoir in Europe, whereas there are plague reservoirs many other parts in the world, including in Central Asia. And there is no more plague among human many places because of increased hygiene. But I'm going to close now with telling you about some work I've been doing on dengue. This is a disease that is rapidly spreading in the world and in China. And these are data from southern China that we were fortunate to analyze, again together with good Chinese colleagues. And we could see this, how climate was driving the dynamics. That study was followed up with another study led by Ruyun Li and others, that we actually modeled the mosquito, and we could demonstrate that the climate link and the climate impact on the dengue dynamics is a result of how climate is affecting the mosquito density. Well, my title was Joining Forces. But I would like to end by having a couple of comments on the fragmentation in science today. This is how science is operating today. We publish in different journals, we read different journals, we go to different meetings, and if we go to the same meeting, we go to the different sessions. We don't interact. We march forward in our trenches, or we sit in our silos, not communicating to each other. We need to pursue interdisciplinarity. And we need to pursue interdisciplinarity and internationalization, which of course is of great importance in the One Belt, One Road and ANSO perspective. Of course, we need to join forces whenever the scientific questions asked require that. We need to join forces like this. And I think the One Road, One Belt initiative is a fantastic one, also from a scientific perspective. The Three-Pole Initiative and the epidemiology focus have a clear global change perspective. The Norwegian Academy of Science and Letters would support a closer link between our ANSO countries on these global changes. Joining forces in the study of climate change and biodiversity in a One Belt, One Road perspective is indeed of great importance. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you for made it up, that CV presentation, and I do have to acknowledge the wonderful presentation delivered by Neil. He basically talked about fragmentation in science. Together, definitely we can make a bigger difference in getting a more unified, more science-based understanding into some of the complicated science problems. Our next speaker is perhaps the Hugo de Bodas from the Russian Academy of Sciences. So the CV, please.
Thank you very much, Chairman. And just a moment. Uh, Yesterday, we saw many very interesting pictures and information about the abiotic factors of the global change. Now, I try to attract your attention to impact of global change on biodiversity. In general point of view, what is the factors that determine the local biodiversity in different part of the world? And now, of course, I I will talk about mainly the South Asia, the territory of Russia and adjacent countries. Of course, it is quite obvious that historical and biological biogeographical factors form the biodiversity we would show now, what we can see now. And of course, the physical and chemical factors, biological interaction, diversification processes, and biological invasion of alien species. Two illustration of these things that you see that's we can see here the number of species of fish in different water basin of the Russia, and it's in variation of this number of these species, which of course connected with the history of this place, and of course with the some climate factors in these regions. And of course, the history, for instance, the Amur Basin originating from different parts of the world and from the Indian fauna and Chinese fauna. And of course, the climate factors and history, we now give now out this picture of the natural zones in Russia. You see there's some big variation from the Arctic desert, sorry, Arctic desert in the north, and the real desert in the south. And of course, the distribution of the animals depends of this climatic factor and historical factor. We see here this zoogeographic zonation in Russian, basically on the data of terrestrial mammals. But I want to pay your attention to one another things. And sometimes we can see not only the result of evolution and some old history distribution of organisms in the world, but also the microevolutionary processes we observe just now. In our territory, we have several so-called hotspots, diversity center, where we observe such species flocks or interspecies forms, so-called ecotype or ecoforms, and we can see the processes of differentiation. Several examples for this. We can, only in one lake in Kamchatka Peninsula, in Kranotska, we observe several different morphotypes and framed of the one species of char. Closer situation were observed in the Transbaikalian region. In some lakes, we can see the three different morphotypes with have different extent of genetical differences, but mainly they differ in ecology and life history strategy and morphology. The same situation we observed in the western part of Mongolia, in Great Lake Hole, not only in salmonid fish which we were sent before, but it's a cyprinid fish, 3 different morphotype and in the several lakes without any genetical differences. I pay attention for these things because it's very important climate change on such hot point of diversification, on such ecomorph flocks. What is about the invasion? Invasion it's have a many ecological effect in biodiversity. Because alien species can considerably change the native species habitats, especially if it is keystone species. Alien species can be competitors and they can be predators of native species. And of course, alien species can carry or themselves or cause disease or parasite infection of aboriginal species. What is the consequences? It is changes in ecosystem structure and functions. What about the global change? First of all, I have to say that um, uh, to my mind and for my colleagues, we can uh, analyze the situation of global change jointly with the human activity, because if sometimes it's very difficult to determine what is the reason of some change in ecosystem and biodiversity, who was the first, global warming, global change, or anthropogenic effects. What are the consequences? Of course, the changes average temperature and seasonal cycle, environmental degradation, habit transformation, and so on. Several examples of the impact of climate change in different parts of the region under our studies. It is for a long time our colleagues they study the Baikal Basin ecosystem. It is terrestrial ecosystem, mainly in basin of the Selenga River, which is the main tributary of Baikal Lake. What is the result of a long-term observation? Now we observe the desertification of plant soil cover in the Baikal Basin terrestrial ecosystem. Really, the desert moved to the north and observe the depletion of grass sod and human horizons and formation done relief with typical desert plants. We observe these 3 typical desert plants will occupy the place which now belong to the steppe zones. It is the space picture of the one place. It's one of the tributary of Selenga River, the Eder River, and during 27 years, sandy cover areas in such experimental plots about 40%, and more than 1% per year. And what is about the the range of many plant species? In this case, this is one of the very common desert species, shrub Caragana bungi. And you see now it is the forest zone of the north of Mongolia, in the basin of the Baikal, in the basin of Selenga River, in some dynamic of these processes in the beginning of this century. You see this biomass in number of the shrub dramatically increase in this place. Another penetration from the south to the north of this region is the Ephedra sinica. This species very good accommodated from desert zone, and they occupied many places because they have a very big roots to survive in such arid places. And this, of course, this species occupied many habitats in the northern part, which was never were found before. We now, in other case, it is from the north of this region. Yesterday, we saw many very interesting and very lot of information about the permafrost degradation in different parts of the world, including Mongolia, including in other places. And according to prognoses, you see here that is, during the future 50 years, many places with now covered by permafrost disappeared, or and because the melting. And now, one of the case of such melting of permafrost in territory of the Siberia. Everybody heard about the Norilsk disaster, which was in last year in this place, and after this disaster, storage fuel tank near Norilsk was destroyed by melting permafrost, and we observed the fuel spill in this place. About more than 20,000 of tons of this fuel came to penetrate to the soil and in the river and the lakes, and biodiversity of soil and water bodies has been severely damaged. You see this fuel spill in the river, but this place is really important for biodiversity conservation, and such kind of biodiversity, where the biodiversity not as a stable situation, but as the processes which I mentioned before about this such hot points of biodiversity. Norilsk here, and all of this, this is very interesting places which inhabited but about the 40 ecomorphs and fishes, species of fish, 10 of them which are endemic. What it means, it's endemic, it's with this fish never we can find in another place. And another thing that's in this place, in this water ecosystem, where the evolutionary microevolution we observe now, many of these fish, salmonid fish, produce such morphotypes. And one of these species, Charles Boganit's char, that is very interesting for human, because it is main source of long chain fatty acids, so-called omega-3, and they produce much more than another species of the world, and more than 30 milligram per gram of the weight. Everybody knows that fatty acids, such kind of fatty acids, prevents cardiovascular disease in human. And we can lost this species for our future. Climate change and diversification. We return back to Mongolia, to the closed basin in this central part, so-called lake valley, where can observe here situated four isolated lakes, and it is which inhabits only one species of cyprinid fish, Aureliusiscus humilis, which and in this place we observed fluctuation of climate fluctuation, but not global climate changes and warming, which we observed just now, but the fluctuation of climate inter-century fluctuation. You see here the volume of in mineralization of one of this lake dramatically changed during this last century. And what we observed, that some of these lakes disappeared, and after that originated in new. It is this such of fluctuation of climate absolutely typical and not depends, we thought that's not depends of the global change of the climate. And what fish doing in these places? During the so-called wait period, which prolonged 10 or sometimes 30 years, we observe different morphotype of this species. During the drought, one of the morphotype, small one, use the river, upper reaches of the river as a refuge, and after then return after the filling the lakes by water. They penetrate again on these lakes. We now very fast differentiation of the fish observed in this place. What is the picture? There is picture of the lakes. You see this process is very quick. Rock Lake in the August of 2010. After only 3 years, lakes originated in U, and fish penetrate to that, and they began to differentiate in 3 morphotypes. You see that's such kind of natural laboratory for study the microevolutionary processes because the fluctuation. But I have to say that it's not so simple, because now this drought period elongated, and at least one of these lakes absolutely disappeared, and I'm afraid that we can lose this very interesting hot points of evolution. Biological invasion of alien species. Everybody knows that it's a global process in many places of the world, including the Russia. That is, we use it as example, the changes in number of invasion species during the last 3 century, as example of more dangerous species, invasive species for our country. And what is more important for invasion, biological invasion processes? There are many different factors with components of the invasion, corridors, vectors, and propagal pressure, invasive species, biological habitat. I already mentioned importance of such characters, biological characters, where we in the about the plants which penetrated to the from the desert zone to the north. But very important ecosystem vulnerability to invasion. That is such general scheme of vulnerability of ecosystem to invasion. Of course, this is very important in primary production, because without the food, it's impossible to some another new species penetrate to this place. Of course, aboriginal species regulated these processes by predators, competitors, and parasites. What we can see when after the warming process about the climate change, of course, we observe the increasing of primary production because vulnerability, which to rise the vulnerability, but the regulation from the aboriginal species which can to reduce the vulnerability. It's not so impact factors now because it is climate, they need to adapt to new climate. It's not a climate not character for adaptation of aboriginal species, which represent here different part of the trophic web. Some example of invasion in Russia. It is basin of Volga River and Volga River basin, and it's a very big invasion corridor connecting with different basins and different seas. And during the climate change in this place in Volga River basin, especially in reservoirs during the 20th centuries were constructed only about 10 big reservoirs in Volga River. And as example, one of them, we can see this, the increasing of the temperature, water temperature, and increasing the primary production, you see, in this place. According to previous scheme, of course, the vulnerability of this ecosystem increased. And what we observe the invasion, of course, it is the big one of the biggest European invasive corridor. Originally, only small species penetrated in different part of this Volga basin, and most of them was from the north. But now, some species move the border of their range to from the south to the north. It is character for all group of water organisms. One example for fish, it's small pelagic fish we inhabit the Ponto-Caspian region. During the 15th century, reach cross the distance more than 1,000 kilometers. Another, we observed it in Belair Lake in the north. Of course, it's not only because of the activity of this fish, but first of all, because the warming of the climate. And as a result, in all river basin of Russia, we found the rising the number of alien species, including the Amur basin and Volga River. Now, more than 30% of fish fauna, it is invasive species or alien species. The same situation in the one of the example in Siberia, in a very cold place, you know, it's Yenisei River. After intentional introduction of the bream, it is south originated species. Now they penetrate in different parts of the Asia and reach the down reaches of the Yenisei River in the Arctic. One example for vegetation for terrestrial plants. Uh, Great ragweed, it's well-known weeds and which allergic weeds, it's not good for human health. It's came to the Europe from the America, and you can see here that's how they distributed in the south of the Russia, because originally it is south species during the end of the last century. This uh, red line, it is the forecast of the north border of the species according to its ability for accommodation. But now we observed, it is data of 2080, we observe this jumped up this border, and now we can find the species in the north. What about the terrestrial animals? Wild boar during the last century and now move the border of this range to the north. And of course, it depends of the snow thickness. Of course, it's not in this year, but the distribution of ungulates depends of the snow in the winter. But now we observe in the north of the Russia these species. What about the rodents? Very dangerous species of rats have a different part of natural range and penetrate. Of course, it is not because the climate change, but because the human activity. The same situation with the in other smaller rodents. It's widespreading to the north too. And muskrats, which originally introduced to Russia, and from these black points of introduction, self-spreading to the north during the end of last century and beginning of this century. In the western part of Russia, range of raccoon dog with introduce this point of introduction, penetrate to the north of the Russia, into the Norway, into the Finland, because the climate change and self-spreading. Another species, stone marten, it is a native range and move to the north and to the east. It appeared the not only hotspots of diversification, but hotspots of invasion. In Balkhash Lake in Kazakhstan, we observe now the alien species more than 90% it is only for zoobenthasis organism of this lake. Finally, I have to say all of this study organized in the frame of the program of biological consequences of global change, which originally initiated by the International Society of Zoological Sciences, and more than 10 years ago adopted by IUBS, International Union of Biological Sciences, and many countries involved in this program. This program promotes the understanding of the impact of global change on biological system and biodiversity, and we try to find the answer to many questions to how this impact of global change and global warming in different part of biota of the world. And one of the part of this work, and my example was as it was a result of this work, was organized in the frame of joint Russian-Mongolian paleontological and Russian-Mongolia complex biological expedition. 2 years ago, we celebrated 50 years of anniversary of this expedition, and we try to continue this study in the future. And what is conclusions? Climate change effective factors of determining the local biodiversity. It is impact in semi-arid zone, in Arctic zone, and it's very important the global warming impact on vulnerability of aboriginal ecosystem, stimulate the invasion processes, global processes of the world now. And very important to attract attention to damage of the permafrost in Arctic. And I'm afraid that in the future, we will observe the many site disaster which was in last year in the Russian Arctic. And in some cases, climate change might result in diversification of water organisms. Thank you very much for your attention.
Our next speaker is Professor Xu Yunlong from the Chinese Academy of Agricultural Sciences. So let's play the little video introducing this professor.
I'd like to have a presentation to take the agriculture as an example, how to transform the system, natural social economic system, from the victim to the solution. We talk about a lot of the climate change observation facts and the impacts from the climate change. Right now, the problem is how to tackle the climate change. For my presentation, directly, I omit all the introduction on the impacts of climate change, then directly to introduce how to do for the adaptation for the agriculture. And adaptation is one component. It's parallel to with mitigation, but sometimes for the measures, they are together. There's a synergy of adaptation and mitigation. So FAO promoted a concept of climate smart agriculture to put adaptation and mitigation together. Then how to do? I will have a brief introduction. After that, I will introduce the innovation on methodology and technology. Then 2 examples in East Africa. Firstly, this figure I extracted from the IPCC AR6 special report on climate change and land. Here you can see food system is between climate system, ecosystem, and the social economic system. And food security is an outreach of the food system. So we can see that food system would be affected from climate change, and also food system will have the interaction with the ecosystem and the social economic system. So directly, we clarify the adaptation of agricultural, agricultural, for agricultural adaptation, we clarify into 4 layers. First is the average trend, the warming trend, the slow onset, slow increase or decrease of precipitation, the elevation of CO2 concentration, something like that. It's the average trend. To the average trend. That's the first, the basic component. Based on it, because of warming, there's enhanced extreme climate events. Then how to do for the adaptation? The enhanced flooding, drought, hot, cold temperature events, something like that. And based on it is the biological consequences induced from the climate change. Then based on it is the socio-economic consequences. So I have a brief introduction for these 4 layers. For example, for the average trend, we can see it is the climatic zoning and the cropping system in China. For example, for the rice planting, mainly in the south of China. But some part in northeast China, there are some rice planting. But because of warming, then there's a great expansion of rice planting in northeast China here. And because of warming, the cropping system boundary, the single to doubling cropping system, the doubling to the triple cropping system, the boundary, there's a shift of northward. And because of the warming and the change, decrease of precipitation, we can see that the water availability for agriculture is reduced. The red color means the reduction of water for agriculture. The second layer is still physical layer, how to adapt to the enhanced extreme events. For this layer, definitely we should improve our work for disaster. Then, because of the warming, then the cultivation, cotton cultivation shifted from North China Plain to Xinjiang. Then the pathway for the transformation, 4 layers. The pathway is for the average trend. It's the utilization of climatic resources. For the enhanced extreme events, then to enhance the work of disaster reduction. For the ecological consequences, then definitely to improve the work of ecological civilization. And for the socio-economic consequences, updating the socio-economic structure and the function. If to update the socio-economic system, definitely together with mitigation and the productivity. That's the relation for the adaptation and the mitigation. There's a synergy and the trade-off between adaptation and the mitigation. For the adaptation, actually, there's a bottleneck is about the theoretical mechanism, how to adapt. Then we have the work on developing the adaptation methodology. For the adaptation methodology, there's a 3 parts. The first part is why adapt for the climate change impact, vulnerability, and risk assessment. For the second part, and it is the core of the methodology, is how to adapt. This the theoretical mechanism of adaptation is a very important component for this part. Then the third part is how to implement concerning the adaptation technology. Then it's related for the innovation in technology. For the innovation technology, the approaches, 2 approaches. First is based on the grassroots technology. Then we have the collective innovation. Then the second is for the high-tech technology innovation. And it's the variable technology for cropping. There's intercropping of Chinese date and wheat. If there's a drought, then we harvest the date. If there's a flooding, more precipitation, then we have the harvest of wheat. And the adaptation in the ecotone, the boundary between the pasture and the agriculture area. And the synergy of adaptation and mitigation. Then synergy of adaptation and mitigation together with the poverty reduction. For the adaptation technology system, there's a different types. Then we show 2 examples in East Africa. The first is the FAO project. It is the project name Global Low Carbon Initiative for Food and Agriculture, and take the Kenya as a target country for the pilot project implementation. For this project, firstly, to have a pioneer research in China for the carbon neutral tea production in China. Then we have the conceptual explain on what is the climate smart agriculture and the carbon neutral tea. What's the relation between them? It's the innovation on climate smart technology, big data, and IoT. It's the effects of this technology system to prevent the hot damage, temperature damage, and the cold damage. That's the effects of this technology system, the effects of mitigation, and the effects of adaptation to put them together. Another project is the UK-China East Africa collaborative project. The target country in Africa is Kenya and Tanzania. Our team, CAS team, is working on a study report on the adaptation planning in the Seg-Cord corridor in Tanzania. It is the position of Seg-Cord corridor. It's an agricultural development corridor. Then we help to develop the adaptation planning that to lower the risk of climate change, then to set up the objectives of the adaptation. Then what's the pathway, how to implement? That's a framework. Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. Just a preliminary idea on how to transfer the agriculture from the victim to the solution, adaptation and mitigation together. Thank you.
To use innovation methodology to address, the agricultural issues under the climate change. Glad to see that extending some of the technologies to Africa. So our next speaker is Professor Kendi Redras from Tribhuvan University of Nepal. And let's play that little CV about this professor.
Okay, thank you, Chair, and all the distinguished professor and ladies and gentlemen. This is Kedar Rizal from Tribhuvan University. My topics of, I'm very much delighted to present in my learning and experience in the countries of Nepal in the ecological restoration as a means of managing degraded ecosystem in the context of climate change. The outline my presentation will be restoration needs, climate change and its impact, ecological restoration concept and roles in climate change, impact amendment, process restoring ecosystem, restoration challenges, conclude and way forward. Yes. In the context of climate change, basically, I will give some examples in the Nepal. There is a lot of water stress and water pollution is increasing in the country of Nepal. And this is one of the phenomena because of the climate change we can see, because in every year there is a lot of flood and a lot of landslide. One of the consequences could be because of the climate change, because of the rainfall pattern is very much unpredicted in the country of Nepal because of slope and other things. At the same time, there is a impact of some industrial product as well in our ecosystem, and encroachment is very much because of urbanizations, and really we can see the water stress in the mountain and the urban area because many of the water sources are drying up. Basically the mountain area and some semi-urban area, which is very much visible in the countries of Nepal, and that could be one of the reasons of the climate change phenomenon in our country, in our context. One of the impact of climate change in our country, Nepal, is habitat and ecological disturbances. Disturbance to structure and function of the ecosystem, loss of native flora and fauna, loss of natural habitat required for lentic and lotic organism is the consequence of the climate change in the mountain of Nepal, or overall, I would like to say. Because of the human activity as well, there is a big pressure in the water resources, and at the same time, because of some activities, really it has impacted to the biodiversity, land of aerial as well as the terrestrial as well as the land ecosystem or water ecosystem of countries of Nepal. In another way, there is the invasive species is also big issue across the country, basically in some national park or in some forests as well. So a lot of the invasive species is approaching into forest in an agricultural system of Nepal. And that could be one of the reasons for big the climate change. If you go in the South Asia, there is one of the, the global example is the Aral Sea, the well, totally water is almost collapse. And in the Nepal also, in the mount, if you see the mountain, you go to the mountain part or in the Himalayas, lot of melting of ice, drying of river can be seen in since last 2 decades. And this is a very regular phenomenon, what can be observed in the northern part of the country. Basically, because the impacts of climate change is in the countries of Nepal, I would like to share here, quality and quantity of water. There is a direct impact in quality and quantity of water across the country. Basically, the severity can be seen in the mountainous region of Nepal. Availability of the water. Now the people are not getting enough quantity of water because their sources are drying up. They live in the top of the mountain or hills. And at the same time, it raised the issue of distribution of the water system. And the local governments are facing a lot of how to distribute the water is one of the other challenges coming up. At the same time, sustainability of the supply of the water. In other hand, it has impact the ecosystem concern, wildlife and ecosystem in the forest or in the any type of ecosystem, flora distribution, landscape stability. At the same time, there is because of the climate change, there is a drinking water, the health and safety, energy, recreation, and disaster. These are the very fundamental issues of climate change, which is impacted the Nepalese social and livelihoods are one of the concern in what we have been facing. Globally, moreover, ecosystems are also damaged by natural causes. Some of the examples which we can share, and we can read from the United States and Canada also, and the drying of the forest because the beetles, and they have only claimed that is because of the climate change issue. In overall, 75% of the earth land are integrated. Lands that have either become desert or polluted or have been deforested or come to agriculture production are also the main cause of the species extinction. Really, this fact, this is one of the example extinct species. In 1930s, there is a one raised, we can see that the leopard give the process, how ecosystem can be restored. And he introduced the new concept. After that, it is a really scaling up across the world. Many of the world ecosystem have undergone the significant degradation with negative impact on biological diversity and people livelihood. There is a growing realization that we will not be able to conserve the Earth's biological diversity through the protection of critical areas alone. Initially, we are only trying to protect the critical area, but it will not help in the days to come. Ecosystem restoration could be an important component of conservation and sustainable development programs so that the livelihood of the people depending on ecosystem can be sustained. Restoration ecology is a young discipline in the country of Nepal, I would like to say. If you see some global fact, how ecosystem has impacted to the ecosystem, the climate change impact ecosystem, there are several facts are there. Say 21% of all mammals, 30% of all non-amphibians, 12% of non-birds, all they are, in the threats at the same time for other as well. And out of 6,028, 1,895, they are in danger. And this is the symptoms of the impact of climate change globally. Now, how in the country of Nepal, how or why we restore the ecosystem? Restoring ecosystem plays a major role in economy of the country for sustaining agriculture, industry, energy generation, and providing the biological resources. Till today, Nepal, more than 70 people based on the agriculture, and it means the biological resources. But the impact of climate change has a direct impact on the agricultural system of the country. What the big research has been highlighted by the previous speaker. See now, in the Nepal, the lot of ecosystem and the land are degraded because of the flood. Now we have taken initiation that how we can restore the bank or land and bank of the river to minimize the poverty. How that land can be converted to the agricultural land and use some agriculture activities. Some initiation has been started with the joint program with the Nepal government and our university. So how the bank of the river, the land which are destroyed by the flood or drought, they can be restored and can be used for the reduction of the poverty. That how that land can be restored is one of the challenge. Now, in a small scale, we have started the practices near riverbank. In a small scales, I would like to say. At the same time, sustaining aquatic species, including the threatened and the endangered zones, restore natural capital such as the drinking water, and exporting ecological resource to change in the economic resources. So the rationale of the restoration ecology is that all these things can be restored if take the longer time and resources. In some part of Nepal, the cultural sports are degraded. Now we are trying to restore the cultural sports where the tourism can be promoted, but if we can promote our ecosystem of nearby area. Another very much interesting and very much important fact is that ecosystem restoration provide the medical services. Many of the plants are the sources of the medicine. So in Nepal, traditionally modern medicine plants. So how to restore those for resources which really provide the say medicinal values of the medicinal services, provides the medical services. So this is the one of the things. At the same time, the recreational values which really give the the economic upliftment of the people nearby area, that the ecosystem can provide the say livelihood, support the livelihood of the people or reduction of the poverty. That initiation has started for managing the ecosystem for this area. Our role of ecological restoration in the climate change impact adaptation. Restoration provides two key management approaches to mitigate the effect of climate change: sequestering carbon through the establishment of green biomass and conservation, and the restoration of biodiversity and ecosystem services. Likewise, restoration as a means of climate mitigation has global benefit, whereas restoration as a means of adapting climate change as benefit at the local and regional level. What I'm trying to say that not only technology, not advanced technology can solve this problem, the impact of climate change. The restoration of ecology at local level can be one of the alternative to manage or to restore the destroyed ecosystem and which was impacted by the climate change. That's why the restoration of ecology could be one means to minimize the impact of climate change at local level for different resources. Insight can also be valuable for the management of the natural areas, such as controlling non-native species, invasives, and the other things also. So, this can be the one of the issues that can be we have to introduce. Many interested commitments have been made for global restoration. Global at large, it is happening. It is coming up, but at local level, the impact of climate change can be addressed by restoring ecology involving the local people and local scientists with use of the conventional knowledge and practices, which we left it since a long time. We only focus on the science. We give the very less attention about the local knowledge and local practices. So in this context, we have been trying in our local level. See, there are some protocols there from scientific perspective, how the ecosystem can be restored or destroyed ecosystem can be restored. So following this protocol, we have started some experiment deployed across the country. See, if you talk about the state of the ecosystems, So some are already very much dead ecosystem is there. We need to restore from one state to very much intact state. So it's only the matter of time and resources. Of course, there are some challenges as I mean, in the country Nepal, I'm talking here, there is very inadequate knowledge and research is going on how to restore the different ecosystem in Nepal in our context. That's why the not having the very adequate knowledge or government has a very less attention about the restoration of ecosystem in the local level. Skills issues is ecological restoration need considered in the larger landscape, maybe the transboundary, India, Nepal, China, Nepal, or nearby districts. We need to scale up this restoration ecology in the landscape approach. Need strengthening of the restoration practices. Whatever the practice that we have, maybe we can share from each other for the restoration ecology and share the knowledge and practice at different level. See, this is the one thing that we have been trying in Nepal, and we have been somehow success to maintain the river bank and hand overing to the community, say doing some restoration activity at local level with the partnership with the local people. So forest restoration, flora and the plant restoration, degree polluted land restoration, and restoring the governance. And we are engaging with the local governments how this can be restored at the local level. That we have been trying, and to some degree we have been saying if we need it, we can share the outcomes of our these local restoration practices at community level or in the local level. In my conclusion, ecological restoration may become a vital component of ecosystem management as we seek to improve habitat degraded, especially due to the climate change. Coupling the restoration effort to conservation and management effort offer many opportunities. One of the greatest need for future work in restoration is to increase our capacity on restoration process and scientific techniques. The way forward, my last slide is that creating collaboration mechanism in the global network, developing a scientific database management in R&D, engaging and encouraging stakeholders for ecological restoration, different level of stakeholders, scientific to the local community and the local governance, clarity to plan, monitor, and evaluate the report, awareness and increasing resilience of stakeholders, local people are ultimate restorers. I mean, only the scientific thought, scientific theory cannot work in the local level, like in Nepal, maybe I don't know, the China, India. In the local knowledge, local people, local experience will be the key, and backing of the science, will be the fundamental key for the management of the ecosystem, degraded ecosystem, I would like to say, which is impact of the climate change. The skill is going on. Dissemination of the best practices and user-friendly knowledge and product, and strengthen the institutional framework and address policy gaps for involving the scientific communities. With these things, I would like to say that ecosystem can be restored, which can be scaled off at different level, and with the knowledge and experience at the local level, supported by the scientific modern theory and some technology also. So only, but my experience that only the latest technology cannot restore the ecosystem unless and until we do not engage the scientists and the local people or local community. And the government has to put in their policy as well. With this system, I would like to thank you for the organized giving opportunities. Thank you very much, sir. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor. Yeah, for elaborating the restoration, as a way to manage the climate change. And now I would like to invite the next speaker, Professor Sergei Semenov from the Russian Academy of Sciences. And let's play that little CV of this professor.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay. Thank you, Professor Jinhua Kao, for giving me the floor. Well, let me retrieve my presentation to the screen. Hello, everyone. I'm Sergei Semyonov, and the topic of my presentation is greenhouse gases and climate changes in climate. It means that it is about the very origin of the global warming problem. So I will be speaking about the following issues: how humans affect the global climate system. Is the climate system really changing globally and regionally? And how risks of negative consequences might be reduced? The flux of radiation emanating from the sun reaches the planets and other cosmic bodies of the solar system and supplies them with radiant energy. It would seem that at close values of the flux of incoming radiant energy, similar thermal regimes should appear on the planets and other bodies like their satellites. However, this is not quite true. The Earth and the Moon, located at approximately the same distance from the Sun, have completely different thermal regimes. On the lunar surface, temperature varies from -173 Celsius degrees at night to 127 Celsius degrees when the sun is at zenith, harsh climate, by the way. This is not the case on the Earth. Why? The answer is as follows. The Earth has a rich climate system consisting of the atmosphere, hydrosphere, including the cryosphere, lithosphere, and biosphere. In contrast, the Moon has only one of these spheres, namely the lithosphere. This gives important finding. The climate depends not only on how much radiant energy comes per unit area per unit time, but also on the properties of the object that is supplied with energy. This is the global energy budget. On the left side of this picture, you may see the incoming solar flux, the flux initially coming from the sun. The flux of radiant energy coming from the sun to the Earth is partly absorbed by the atmosphere and partly reflected by the atmosphere and the Earth's surface. The rest is absorbed by the surface. Then the upward fluxes transfer the heat from the surface as thermals, latent heat, and infrared radiation. It is depicted at the right side of the figure. One can see from this picture that most of heat is transferred in the form of infrared radiation. About 90% of this flux is captured by the atmospheric gases and particles, and significant part of this amount is redirected back to the Earth's surface. This leads to warming of the surface layer. More greenhouse gases in the atmosphere, more warming. It is how the greenhouse effect works. The greenhouse effect, playing the major role in the forming of the thermal regime on the Earth at the global scale, is defined as following. The radiation effect of the presence of greenhouse substances in the atmosphere, which is expressed, other things being equal, in an increase in temperature in the near surface layer compared to the situation of their absence in the atmosphere. A characteristic feature of greenhouse matter, it absorbs long-wave radiation of the Earth's surface and the atmospheric layers, to a much greater extent than short-wave radiation initially comes from the sun. Nitrogen, oxygen, and argon, which constitute more than 99% of dry atmospheric air, practically do not have such feature. In the contrast, so-called greenhouse gases, water vapor, carbon dioxide, methane, nitrous oxide, ozone, some other, and water vapor, water in the form of clouds, do have this feature. Their presence in the atmosphere makes the Earth's climate comfortable enough for humans. A magnitude of the greenhouse effect depends on the content of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere. This is the simplified scheme of greenhouse effect. It is our scheme, and I would skip it for the brevity. This modern understanding of the greenhouse effect can be possible only due to great efforts of many famous scientists of the past. Key persons were as follows: Horace Bénédicte de Saussure, Jean-Baptiste Joseph Fourier, John Tyndall, Svante August Arrhenius, Guy Stewart Callender. This is Professor Michael Boudicca, Russian climate scientist. In 1971, he suggested that the near-surface global warming would begin due to anthropogenic enrichment of the atmosphere with carbon dioxide. And this warming may reach several degrees in the 21st century. This point was stated by him in the brochure entitled Human Influence on the Climate, published in 1972. The forecast for the beginning of the 21st century is fully supported by the facts now. Nowadays, the history of greenhouse gases content in the Earth's atmosphere is known rather well. The EPICA project was implemented at the Dome Sea Station in Antarctic. In this project, carbon dioxide, methane, and nitrous oxide concentrations in the air bubbles frozen into Antarctic ice of different age at Dome Sea yielded the following curves. This is for carbon dioxide. At the left panel, you may see the historical fluctuations of concentration of carbon dioxide. It is over almost 800,000 years. And at the right side, you may see the current situation for carbon dioxide, roughly from 1950 to 2015. As you may see, it is much higher now. The same pictures for methane. Contemporary methane concentrations are also much higher than historical ones. The same situation with nitrogen oxide. This picture illustrates the main anthropogenic drivers of the observed increase in greenhouse content in the Earth's atmosphere. It is continuous increase in anthropogenic greenhouse emissions into the atmosphere, in spite of serious international efforts aiming at its reduction. Observed long-term trends in carbon dioxide and methane content are common over the globe because these gases are well mixed. Seasonal variations are also similar. This is shown by the analysis of data obtained at the monitoring stations operating under the auspice of the World Meteorological Organization. Stations distribution of the spatial distribution of the station are given in this figure. It is global distribution, actually global. Now this is the outcome. At this panel, at this figure, you may see change in global mean temperature, surface temperature. At the upper panel, you may see annual averages, while at the lower panel, it is decadal average. Each of last 3 decades has had a higher temperature at the Earth's surface than any previous decade since 1850. In the Northern Hemisphere, 1983 to 2012 was the warmest 30-year period in the last 1,400 years. This is the result of attribution. Green rectangle, green value correspond to calculated warming due to observed greenhouse gas anthropogenic increase. Yellow value corresponds to calculated cooling due to other anthropogenic factors. Orange value is the resultant that is very close to the black value, black rectangle, depicting observed warming. This is facts. Observed climate warming is not even over the globe. There is a scheme of observed surface temperature change from 1901 to 2012, derived from the temperature trends determined by the linear regression. The overall tendency is warming, but cooling is observed in some regions. This is a similar picture for precipitation. Observed changes from 1951 to 2010. The overall tendency is also mainly wetting, but magnitude varies by regions. There is drying in some regions. Many regions are becoming more dry. Of course, these global changes in temperature and precipitation, they have some reflection over Russia. It is Russia, the period from 1976 to 2012, its linear trend in temperature of near-surface air in Celsius degree per 10 years. The main tendency is warming, as you may see. This is also Russia, and the same time period. This is linear trend in precipitation sum, percentage of 1961 to 1990 norm per decade, per 10 years. The main tendency is wetting in summer, drying observed in some regions, including south of European part of Russia. Climate change per se would not trouble us much as purely geophysical phenomenon. However, it creates risks for natural and socio-economic systems, for the human health and well-being. Actually, this is the reason for concern. Risk is one of the basic concepts for the impact assessment. It occurs when hazards from climate change, including extreme and trends, interact with the exposure and vulnerability of recipients, i.e. affected systems. Changes in the climate systems, left side of the figure, and socioeconomic processes, including adaptation and mitigation, right side of the figure, cause changes in hazards, exposure, and vulnerability. Risks might be reduced through reduction in climate-related hazards via mitigation, and through reduction of exposure and vulnerability of affected systems via adaptation. As it may seem from this figure, Russia has completely fulfilled its obligation regarding the reduction of greenhouse gas emissions agreed under the Kyoto Protocol. You may see here greenhouse gas emissions in Russia in 1990 to 2015, excluding land use, land use change, and forestry. It is megatons of CO2 equivalents. And colors denotes sectors, sources of emission. Blue, it's energy, green, it's agriculture, yellow is industry, and gray is waste. Moreover, Russian greenhouse emissions in land use change, and forestry sector have been substantially reduced and become negative. The National Adaptation Plan is also being developed according to the obligation of Russia and Paris Agreement. So it is time to summarize for me, and the takeaway messages are as follows. Economic activity in the industrial era, conventionally ceased 1850, has led to significant enrichment of the atmosphere with greenhouse gases, CO2, so it's carbon dioxide, methane, nitrous oxide, etc. The increase in the content of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere has strengthened the natural, basic greenhouse effect that led to a warming of the climate in the near surface layer of the atmosphere. The observed global warming from the beginning of the industrial era to the present time is about 1 degree Celsius. The warming that has been observed since the middle of the 20th century is mainly due to anthropogenic enhancement of greenhouse effect. Climate change has manifested not only in the thermal regime and precipitation, but also in other parameters of the climate system, including occurrence of extreme hydrometeorological events. All this is observed in northern Eurasia, including Russia. The consequences of climate changes observed and projected for the 21st century for natural and economic systems in Russia could be both negative and positive. For assessment of them and informed balancing of mitigation and adaptation efforts, detailed research studies are needed. This is some cited literature, and thank you for your attention. Thank you very much.
All right, and thank you, for the previous speaker that talks about the importance of continuous, scientific investigation studies on the impact of climate change. And our next speaker is from Hungary, Professor Alvin Balas, General Director of ATK Center for Agricultural Research. Now let us play that CV video. Thank you.
Okay, Mr. Chairman, dear participants and distinguished participants and lecturers, it was a great honor for me to be invited for this very important conference to share with you our ideas and opinion about the necessity of improvement of agriculture practice in a sustainable manner. I would like to outline of my talk or contribution talking about global challenge, food security, climate change, intensify or extensify, and finally some thought on conclusions. First of all, there are a challenge on food, energy, and water security in the light of the climate change. According to FAO prediction, food demand will be increased by 2050 about 60%. Water supply increased demand 35% by 2050, estimated by UNESCO. And the energy increase, it's very important, by 35% on the year of 2050. And this in a context of biodiversity. There are two key questions. Can we provide enough water and energy and food with, to the growing population? Can we mitigate with the climate change or the extremities, and in the same time keeping the biodiversity and ecosystem alive? Talking about food security, food production outlook is quite simple. From now, let's say from last year to 2050, the global population growth from 7.8 billion estimated about 25% plus. And this means that 9-10 billion people in the year of 2050. And this means also the demand for food will increase about 60%. With less water, using less energy, fertilizer and pesticide, with unit product per capita. If you think on the number of the persons per hectare in the year of 1960, it was only 2, while in 2020, per hectare, we had already 5 persons. So that's a drastic increase in the population. Meantime, there is an inefficient conversion of calories of the feed. The meat production takes 6 times more land to get enough meat, and the same amount of calories for the cereal products. So the changing diet will have a large impact on land use and in the favor of feed production. Livestock uses 65% of the European Union cropland. So the challenge is that the limited biocapacity potential is very important. The surface area is 51 billion hectare, and out of this, only 22% is productive, 18 land, and 4% of ocean. Productive land area is 9 billion billion hectares. Out of this, 4 billion hectares is forest, 3.4 is pasture, and 1.6 billion is cropland. You can estimate that it's a real shrinking the agricultural land on the globe, so it will be a real problem in the future, how we can cope with the increased food demand for the increased population. The productive land is limited and it's multifunctional because it's not only used for feed or food, however, in a lot of for industry. The population growth, it's quite well known how they started in the early last century. And if you think it's a dramatic increase in starting about in the year 2000. So this, if totaled in the 2050 about 9-10 billion, it will be really a great task for the mankind to cope with a sustainable agriculture and sustainable way of life. The food demand is really an important question. By 2050, food dietary shift will result in the consumption equivalent of 11.5 billion people at the 2009 diet level. You can see that, of course, for 1 kilogram corn, it's which is a calorie of 3,240, while the meat is only 1,400 kilocalorie per kilogram. So the conversion is really not the best way to to cope with the high quality food and feed. The consumption driven society versus the hunger. This is a key issue. Part of the world, the developed world, is really the food is cheap, while there are on the underdeveloped country, the food is very expensive. The higher the income, the higher the food demand. Access to food is the issue, but not ours, where 0.8 billion people are really suffering from malnutrition and undernutrition. Our welfare is increasing, 1.3 billion people, and we will suffer from that and plus a lot from food chain waste. Europe is scared of a migration flow from south to the north due to the civil unrest. The multicultural model has failed in Europe. There is also a lot of problem with obesity and the epidemic. Now there is a lot of people, especially in the developed world, they are overweight and they are having a lot of dietary problem due to the overweight of this huge population. Of course, there is a hidden hunger worldwide. The population adjusted hidden hunger in 308 countries marked with spot, especially in Africa and some part of Asia and in Latin America. The child and adult can be malnourished by using undernourished or overnourished problem. The hidden hunger means that the micronutrient defect, vitamins and minerals is a huge problem. Just to think on vitamin A, lack of vitamin A in a lot of area of the population where people are not having enough vitamin A, which can cause blindness or a lot of problem on malnutrition, and even young children die due to the this vitamin A deficiency. So the Thomson writers resulted that the foodstuff sub-index, which is really an important issue, food riots in North America is really has been a key issue early on. Food loss and food waste worldwide is also very important to cope with. The evidence-based data on food waste and loss is weak. The NGOs quote as 1.22 billion per year, ton per year. And this is especially, the waste is respecting for North America and Europe. And of course, also it is in the underdeveloped country or developing country are also suffering for food waste. This food waste loss is depends on technology and of course depends on consumer behavior. In the developing regions, food loss and food waste is lower than in the developed region. That is a real key issue because the surplus in food in the developed world is really a big problem, because in Europe and in the United States, the food loss and waste is really a big issue and a huge constraint in the politicians and the level. This is the way how the food loss is expected by the NGOs quote, and this is really an important issue in all different kind of food, which is we having losses at different level. How is coming? This is the challenge food losses and plus energy and water losses. You shouldn't forget that if you are producing 1 kilogram of corn and export it, you are exporting water. To produce 1 kilogram of corn needs 340 liters of water to produce. So where are the losses? First of all, there are already losses in the field due to the pests and diseases. This can reach up to 40% due to the bad agriculture practice. Pre-processing also it's a problem. It's about 10-15% in quoted, like broke grains, excessive dehulling and so on. Also in the transport, there is spillage and leakage, which also cause losses. Storage by the insects and rodents and bacteria can also reduce the amount of food or feed. Also, there is a loss and when you process and package, extensive peeling, trimming inefficiently. And after that, in marketing, in the retailing system, there is also a huge, can be reach a quite huge loss. And of course, there is a plate waste by consumers and retailers. So it can total for cereal, the losses up to 60-70%, which is it's an enormous percentage of the product produced. The other question is the environmental security. Global CO2 emission, we heard already from previous talks, there is a big problem at the moment. 70% of the food imports in the European Union comes from the developing countries, which are vulnerable to climate change or extremities. There is an increasing dependency in those areas, while in the low carbon future, you may cope somehow this energy losses and also reducing global CO2 emissions. The global energy demand increases, as I mentioned earlier, 35% by the year of 2050. In 2018, CO2 emission reached 37 billion tons, which is a concentration of 405 ppm. 89% of the CO2 emission and are energy related. Transport mainly out of this 25% due to the transport. Passenger vehicles fleet increased from 1.2 to 2 billion by the year of 2035. So the price of the CO2 in Europe and the emission allowances and the EU emission trading system is quite complicated. In Germany, the climate change package is reflecting that the German carbon pricing reform include a price emission in seasons not covered by the European Union emission trade, the systems such as transportation and buildings, which is the main concern in this level. The global drying, which is also an important issue by the water crisis. Water bubble is unsustainable and fragile. 70.7 billion people today have to suffer the same, have to use the same quantity as the 300 million global inhabitants of the Roman times. The water use, you can expect that drinking water per person per day is 5 liters. And the household are usually use 20 to 500 liters per person day. The wheat production needs 500 to 4,000 liters per kilogram. The meat production conversion of the water needs 5 to 15,000 liters per kilogram. Biofuel is from 1,000 to 3,500 liters per liter. If you can just check a cotton t-shirt, it needs to produce a cotton t-shirt using 2,000 to 3,000 liters of water. So agriculture using average of 3,000 liters per person day and the liter per calorie. Meantime, transpiration and evaporation also is increasing, and about 20-70% of the water for food comes directly from rain, and an increasing part is met by irrigation. A quarter of the world's population lives in closed or closing basins. Closed basins build until there is no more water left. 2 billion people lack access of the safely managed drinking water. The water scarcity is, we can call it, water is the new oil. And no water left for more development. The Yellow River, Colorado, the Amur and Sir Darya, the Murray Danding, the Egypt, the Nile in Jordan, the groundwater overdraft in India. 60% of the farmers are dependent on groundwater irrigation. There is a warning signal by the climate change on soil damage. We are all responsible for climate change. How much we are responsible depends on our country of residence and the consumption pattern, with the rich being the most responsible. The soil damage, 25% of the agricultural land is seriously damaged. Biological productivity is limited by extremities, not by averages. So this should be kept in mind. Earlier, there were the Green Revolution introduced by Norman Borlaug, the Nobel Prize winner, wheat breeder, and nowadays there are some versions on the sustainable intensification. The keys to the Green Revolution were improved seed and inputs on fertilizer, the breeding for more yield while increase the nitrogen and water dependence, breeding of cereals, irrigation management, fertilizers, and mainly nitrogen is needed. What are the keys to the sustainable intensification? First of all, plant breeding, shorter seasons, less water use, maybe the genetically modified technology and so on. Improving nitrogen efficiency, decoupling nitrogen to the yield dependence. Those are the key issue of the sustainable intensification. Now the question is that what is that the sustainability and the intensification? How do we get there? The increased production on the current land area and sustaining nature area is almost impossible. The reduced inputs plus water use and plus weight, that's a good management practice. Increased crop yields plus resilience in the climate variability and variation. Sustainable intensification equivalent to nutrient management. Extensification of agriculture environmental program, the decrease in environmental damage by reducing nitrogen fertilizer, but also decreasing the yield. Intensification, luxury supply with nitrogen, increase in yield, but strong increase in environmental damages. Sustainable intensification can be very efficient by using efficient nitrogen use, increase the yield and decrease the environmental damage. This can be a good system to be optimized, and this can be done with modern new breeding techniques and help to solve this the sustainable intensification program. So some conclusion which I can summarize from this short contribution. The land, energy, and water availability are limited. Existing agriculture areas will be lost to other use like bioenergy. And unfortunately, we should consider that day by day we are losing agriculture land due to the very strong industrialization or environmental problems. Unfortunately, soil degradation will continue for many areas, which we should consider and try to avoid the soil degradation as much as we can. Changing climate will an additional production stress, but this is one thing which we cannot really interact or can modify climate change or extremities, because it's very difficult to even think on that, how we can cope with that part. The early green revolution demonstrated their promises, but also produced some constraints. The opportunity is that the sustainable intensification is very simple. The technology and economics, you may call it as profitability, will be very important. Thank you for your attention.
And thank you, Professor, for your excellent presentation. Obviously that mankind faces a lot of serious challenges. Only by relying on science, technology, and economical maximization and togetherness, global partnership, we can really address those very dire challenges. Our next speaker is Professor Pan Jianhua from the Chinese Academy of Social Sciences. I guess he will talk about energy perspective. So let's play Professor Pan's CV.
I don't know, so it's okay now? Okay, that's really great. Well, thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. A great pleasure being with you, talking about carbon neutrality, the global, efforts meeting the Paris Agreement goals. The subject I'm going to share with you is about carbon neutrality, the international processes, and the Chinese approaches, or how far China is going and how fast China can go. Well, next please. Well, first we need to have a look at the international processes, focusing the emission of carbon to net zero. Next, please. It's really a long process. In early 1990s, when climate negotiation was initiated, there was no such a goal or no such a request to reduce carbon emissions. It was in 1995 when there was a Berlin mandate at the first COP meeting, the Conference of the Parties meeting in Berlin in 1995. There was a mandate indicating that in 1997, the developed countries or the Annex I parties should reduce their emissions in 2010 as compared to 1990 level. The rate of reduction should be more than 5%. That was the 1997 Kyoto target. That's only for the Annex I or the rich or industrialized countries only. And then in 2007 in Bali, Indonesia, at the UN Climate Conference, 2 degrees target was first reached on the agenda, and 2007, 2009 in Copenhagen, the Copenhagen Accord was negotiated, and the 2 degree target was officially approved. But in the end, the Copenhagen Accord was ignored. And then 2015, we have the Paris Agreement, and 2 degrees target was very clearly indicated, and also in particular, net zero emission target was stated. Is stated in the Paris Agreement as a collective goal at the middle of this century. That is, by 2050, we should go to net zero emissions. So that's where we have the international legal sorts of background, and then at the very beginning, that's 1997, the Kyoto Protocol. The target was only made for the developed or rich countries. The overall, 5%, but the negotiated results was 5.2% reduction in 2010 as compared to 1990 level, and the division of burden, that is the European Union 8%, the United States 7%, Japan 6% reduction, and the Russia 0, no increase, net zero increase in emission. But in the end, Kyoto Protocol was in effect 8 years later, that's 2005, but the United States refused to ratify the protocol, and later, the second, period of commitment was not negotiated, and then we continued to the Paris Agreement, and in the Paris Agreement, the target is made so clear that we have to keep the temperature increase below 2 degrees, and with a possibility, and efforts to keep control of temperature increase below or at 1.5 degrees Celsius. By the end of this century, as compared to pre-industrial level. And then this is only for temperature, and then for emission reductions, we should peak immediately, and then we can. Oh, the next page, please. Sorry, next page. Oh, yeah, again, the next one, because this is 1997 Kyoto Protocol, and the next one we have gone to the next one, please. Yeah, this is the red one, 2.5 and 1.2 degrees and 1.5 degrees. That's the Paris Agreement target, and peaking, as soon as possible, and net zero by the middle of this century. And the difference between Paris Agreement and the Kyoto Protocol, there are 2 or 3. The first one is that the Kyoto Protocol, the emission reductions requirements were only made for the Annex 1 or developed countries, and developing countries were not required to make concrete emission reduction targets. So this is one, there was a division, there was a difference between the developed and the developing countries. And the second difference is that the Kyoto Protocol is a top-down approach. That is, we have the aggregate target, and that the burden is shared among everybody. So it's top-down. And the Paris Agreement is very much different. It's bottom-up. It's so-called nationally determined contributions. Individual parties, individual countries, you just see how much you can do, and the amount of emissions you can reduce. You just make your own contributions. So this is, the differences, and of course, the Kyoto sorts of market approaches, like the emissions trading, CDM, and the joint implementation. These market mechanisms were are not repeated in the Paris Agreement. So next, please. Right. Well, because of the Paris Agreement, individual parties, many of them or some of them have made a very clear bottom-up approach commitments, that is nationally determined contributions. Some of them, were legally through legislation, and some through submission of national targets to the United Nations, to the United Nations, and some of them are made, publicly at global occasions. So we can see some of them, like the Scandinavian countries, the Nordic countries, their targets are somewhat well advanced, like in Finland, in Norway, in they said that they would go to carbon neutrality or net zero emissions before 2045. Some can be 2035, and very interestingly, under the Trump administration in the United States, the Trump administration withdraw from the Paris Agreement, and the California state government made a commitment, or voluntary commitment, that is by 2040, 2045, they would go 100% zero carbon electricity production and consumption. So here, I think that some of the countries, at least some 70s, head of states, or some about 1/3 of the parties have made it. Okay, next page, please. 1/3 of the parties have made it clear that they would go to carbon neutrality, something around 2050 or so. And the details, there's too much detailed information. I will not spend time going into detail. Next slide, please. So well, I think that we have the target, we have the nationally determined contributions. Next please. We need to look the actual the emission paths in of selective countries, and here I made just 4 typical countries or country groups. One is the as you can see, from the 1960s up to now, the developed parties like the EU and the United States, they have peaked already, and they have been on the decline since somewhat as early as the 1970s, like in the European Union. The United States, the peak happened in early this century, but it's been on the decline as well. So for the developed countries, the peak, even you can see from the European Union, without the Paris Agreement, without climate convention, they peaked and they started to decline. But the thing that they have a plateau that is very high level for some fluctuations, but the rate of reduction is very, very slow. So on the left hand side, that's in aggregate, and then the developing world like China, in the process of rapid industrialization and urbanization, and you can see very rapid increase of energy consumption and the emissions, because the energy consumed is somewhat carbon intensive fossil fuels, in particular coal. And then you can see the other country, that's India, in the process of early stage of industrialization and urbanization. Is been growing very, very fast indeed right now. And then we look at the per capita case, and it's also the same, like the United States, although at a relatively high level, but it's been on the decline. And the European Union the same, and China, I think that in terms of per capita level, we have reached the peak already. Probably it's been on the decline already. And India is on the still in the past to increase. The thing is very interesting is that we have something called the environmental Kuznets curve, that is one with increasing income, and per capita emission would be increased as well. And then at a certain point, you would peak and then decline. And we can see, there's somewhat, a trend, but it's not so clear. Look here in the United States, you can see, per capita income has been from somewhat, $10,000 up to now $60,000, but the reduction is somewhat, minimal. And it's also the case for European Union and Japan. And so I think that we can see, it's not that easy for a country to reduce emissions very rapidly. If you look at the historical records. Next, please. Well, why, we need to have some explanations why, some countries, naturally peak and decline, and some countries, ask for more space for emissions. The reason is very clear. That is the level and the stage of economic development. In the 1990s, we have a very clear, two blocks. That's the developed and the developing countries, the South and the North. So in the UN FCCC, the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, we have the Annex 1 parties, that is all the countries that finished the industrialization, were included in the Annex 1. And all the developing countries, including China, were included in the non-Annex 1 parties. So at that time, we only have the developed and the developing countries. So that is why, in the Kyoto Protocol, we have only the developed countries to reduce their emissions, and the developing countries, their level of emission was low, and there is a need for economic development, and the energy demand increases. And then in the late in the 1990s, there was a new group that is something called newly emerging economies, like China, India, I think that Russia included as well. Newly, emerging countries, and these economies, they are increasing emissions is very fast. Their aggregate emission level is pretty high, and the per capita level of emission been increasing fast as well. So in this case, the developed countries would suggest that the developing countries should be included in the agreement for emission reductions. That is why we have the Copenhagen Accord, and then we have the Paris Agreement. In that agreement, all the parties, not only the developed but also developing countries, they should make their own nationally determined contributions. So the world been changed, but there is a slight difference between the United States and the European Union and Japan, because the United States, the population is increasing, and they have a physical space for further expansion of their economy. So they somewhat more hesitant than the Europeans and the Japanese to have a clear target for emission reductions. And I call the Japanese and the European economies as superly saturated economies, simply because they have no physical room for further economic expansion, and the population being stabilized already. So there is a slight difference, although they are developed economies, but the room for further physical expansion of the economy, that there is a difference. Next, please. Here, I think that the details why, as you can see, in the future, we have, the developing countries, the Africans, the American, and of course, the Americans, their population will keep increasing. For instance, in the United States, in the 1950s, their population was only 150 million, and now 320 million. By the end of this century, the United Nations population will go up to 450 million. So I think that because of increasing population, they would require more energy consumption, and if renewable energy, zero energy would not be sufficient, and then there might be an increase in emission, demand. So that is why the United States, they have the problems, and then the European Union, population has been decreasing relatively fast, and also China, you can see the population has been stabilized and will be on the decline very soon, and from currently 1.4 billion in total population. By the end of this century, according to the UN population projections, if we use the medium fertility rate, that is 1.68, and then the population, would be somewhat, 1 billion. So there was somewhat, 400 million population decrease over, the future, next 8 decades or so. And the India, population is expanding, and then of course, by after the mid of century, the Indian population will be stabilized as well. So, and in that case, I think that we can understand why some countries would require more emissions, would be more reluctant to make ambitious emission reduction targets. Next, please. Well, and having looked at the international processes, and the reasons behind nationally positions and strategies, we look at China's peaking neutrality and nationally determined contributions. Next, please. On the 22nd of September 2020, that's last year, the Chinese President Xi Jinping at the UN General Assembly, announced that China would go for carbon neutrality by 2060. That is very ambitious, and many countries, highly praise such an ambition, and some countries, like even the United States and many European countries as well, they have some doubts. But later, China made it very clear we are very serious and we would go carbon neutrality, and we have the approaches. And then we can make the comparison of nationally determined contributions under the Paris Agreement. In 2015, China's NDC, nationally determined contributions, the target was somewhat relative, that is intensity target, and peaking was something around 2030, and there's no absolute reductions. And then in 2020, last year, on the 12th of December last year, and President Xi made it clear that we are going to increase our ambitions. That is, the intensity would be higher than the earlier one, the highest one, and above the highest one, that is more than 65. And in particular, two targets are very impressive. One is that the share of non-fossil fuels in the energy mix by 2030 from 20% up to 25%. Because China is the #1 energy consumer in the world, somewhat 30% more energy consumption than the United States. 1% is a huge amount. Somewhat 1% is 60 million tons of equivalent of energy. So it's not a small amount, from 20 to 25, huge efforts. And the other is installed capacity of electricity generation by coal and wind. By 2030, we're going to install wind and solar power generation capacity to 1,200 gigawatts of electricity generation. So this amount of installed capacity, you may have somewhat the not very clear impression. This installed capacity level is somewhat similar to the total installed capacity electricity generation in the United States now. So you can see the scale and the efforts that the Chinese are doing for zero carbon emission energy supply. Next, please. Why we have the confidence? Because we made the commitment, and this is simply because we can do it. Why we can do it? Simply because the technology has been progressing very, very fast. In terms of solar PV, the cost in the last decade, last 10 years, the cost has been reduced by 87%, and now only 1.5 US cents we can generate 1 kilowatt hour of solar, of electricity from solar. So in somebody even more competitive in the electricity market than coal. And then on the right column of this slide, you can see the projected cost for installation of different power sources. You can see coal will be more and more expensive, and the solar will be much and much cheaper. And then you can see the trend is so clear. I think that not only China can do it, and all the other countries, including African developing poor countries, they can do it as well, because the cost is so competitive, and what we need is not carbon, it's electricity. When we have electricity from renewable, from zero, and then that's enough. So next, please. Well, the thing is that for solar, there's a one problem, that is when you have solar PV installed, and then agricultural production, forests would not be able to grow, because solar radiation can be used only once. Once solar radiation is used for electricity generation, and then there will be not possibility for green vegetation, for green plants. So that's the challenge. The problem, this issue is that in China, the northwestern part of China is Gobi Desert, plenty of land, space, and plenty of solar radiation, so we can have long distance power transmission. And another problem is that when you have solar and wind, but this is intermittent. We must have a stable power supply. And then, water, hydropower is controllable. In southwestern part of China, we have plenty of installed hydropower generation, capacities. And also, in the eastern part, we have, plenty of rainfall, and, vegetation is really is good. So we can have biomass. So if we combine, wind, solar, hydro, and biomass, and then we would be able to provide zero carbon emission electricity supply. And then some people would say, well, okay, electricity is fine, but transport would be a challenge. Here on the right corner, but it's in Chinese, I can show you. It's in Chinese, I can tell you. That is, the Chinese government has made a plan for purely electrical vehicles development in the future from 2021 to 2035. By currently, the total amount of purely electrical vehicles produced in the market, sold, produced, is something 1.5 million. And then by the end of 14th five-year plan, that's by 2025, we are going to have at least somewhere 20% of the newly sold automobiles will be purely electric. That would mean that some 5 to 6 million purely electrical vehicles will be in the market. And then another indicator is even more interesting. 100 kilometers of drive, there will be only lower than 12 kilowatt hours. You can drive 100 kilometers. So you can see it's very efficient. And then by 2035, that's 15 years later, some countries have made it clear that all the new in the automobile market, gasoline vehicles will be banned. And in China by 2035, we will not be able to ban, but only a small proportion will be gasoline powered. The majority will be purely electric. So we can see from the consumer side, from the the end of consumption, and then we can see the not only coal but oil will be out of this stage as well. Next, please. So, well, we can do it, but we do have challenges. But on the other hand, I think that China has made the ambitious commitment, and we are going to push forward the process. Next, please. Well, there's too much information, in this slide. The problem is that in China, the coal is the challenge. Currently, 10 years earlier, the coal was certainly dominating, source of energy. 70% of total energy consumption was from coal, and last year it was reduced by 2020. 56.8% of total energy was from coal. And this is compared to only 25%, world average. And for some other countries, like, Germany, they are going to phase out coal completely by 2036. The UK is even earlier. So this will be a huge challenge for China to get rid of coal. But we do have the coal benefits. If we, get rid of coal and the air quality would be improved, health benefits will be more. And also, the ecological restoration, in the coal mining regions will be possible as well. So, and the other is that, because in China the oil reserve is insufficient. We have a huge lack of oil reserve. For energy security, for oil security, we are going to to produce oil from coal. So we do have some ethanol, some coal chemistry projects, but these are the problems. And I think that, we are going to reduce the capacity step by step. And of course, we have some basic infrastructure like, coal transport facilities, all this, they have to, to be phased out as early as possible. Of course, there will be a loss. For instance, for super critical power generation, the lifetime is normally 40 or 50 years, and currently they are just now put into invested, and then their lifetime will be shortened, and then that cost where it's a problem as well. So we do have such challenges, the replacement of coal, and also the short lifespan of investment. Next slide, please. Well, the thing is that we do have the challenge, but we can see we have some other possibilities. Carbon neutrality. We must have forest sinks, because in China, if you look at the global forestation trend, China is doing the best as compared to most other countries in the world. So forest sink will provide some space to help with the so-called carbon neutrality process. But to me, forest sinks, the bioenergy is even more important, and also climate resilience is the absolute core benefit from forestation and reforestation. So the information is too much here. I think that I can only share with you the key messages. Next, please. Well, we come to the concluding slide. So, well, you see, some people say, China, you are going to carbon neutrality, before 2060. is 2060. The many developed countries, they are going to carbon net zero emissions in 2050. You are not the most ambitious. You are not taking the lead. Well, this is true, but on the other hand, if you look at the levels of development, currently in 2020, per capita GDP in China, is only $10,000 per capita, and in the United States, it's something over 60,000. The Chinese average income is 1/6 of the Americans, is 1/5 of the Europeans. And in terms of urbanization, we still have some 40% of people living in rural areas. So these are the problems, because we, in terms of stage of development, we are a latecomer. I know we probably more than 10 years in the process of development, later than the developed ones, but we see before 2060. So that means that we are shortening the gap, and we are doing our best. So this is in comparison with the rich, highly developed countries. And then if you look at the other developing countries, I think that China is taking the lead and demonstrate that net zero emission is possible without negative impacts of economic development. It's actually an opportunity, because you have employment from renewable energy production. We have all the replaced industrial sectors, like even the automobile, the vehicles, they can be purely electric. We have the batteries. We have all this will generate employment positions and in the source of economic growth. So this would mean that the Chinese carbon neutrality target will have a huge impact on the pushing of the Paris Agreement target. That means that if China is going to be carbon neutral by before 2060, and then the rich ones, you must go much earlier. And then China is going to be carbon neutral before 2060, and then the latecomers, like the Indians, the Africans, as well. If the Chinese can do it, we can do it as well. So I think that this is absolutely positive, for meeting the Paris Agreement target. I think that I have finished my presentation, and I learned a lot from the presentations in the meeting, and I hope that we have opportunities to communicate for carbon neutrality to push the process. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Pan, for a very comprehensive presentation on carbon dioxide neutrality, and particularly the Chinese past facing confidence in achieving a goal. And our next speakers, a couple of, actually, I do want to thank all the audience to sticking to the end, because the best presentations are at the end of the discussion. So the three speakers will talk very important part of the world, that is climate change in North Atlantic. Please play the video for the three CVs.
I'm Sergey Gulev, and I will present a regional high-resolution product of the North Atlantic. And this talk will be a little bit probably out of track of the previous talks, but its target is to demonstrate the product which allows for diagnostics and analysis of the observable, actually, present climate change in a critically important area, and also for potentially giving the parcel or template and paradigm actually how to work on a better prediction of climate change in the near future and in the far future. And why is North Atlantic? North Atlantic is a critically important area for understanding climate change. When we say that climate is warming, we say that this is an ocean warming, in fact, because ocean takes about of this 1 watt per square meter with which climate is warming on the top of the atmosphere. Ocean takes about 93%, and putting it into the ocean heat content change, and ocean warming is even when climate of the atmosphere is not warming. This is why it is so important actually to look into ocean changes. And North Atlantic particularly is a critical place where ocean signals are transferred into atmosphere, and also where the ocean operates in a way just closing actually this loop on the global conveyor with 3 deep convection locations, actually in the Lap Sea, Irminger Sea, and the Nordic Seas. And this very complicated circulation, which is shown at the bottom with respect to this plot, it demonstrates actually the whole complexity of the ocean processes. And on your right, actually, you see a very simple schematic of how ocean may affect ocean signal, for instance, evaporation here or evaporation here, how the ocean may affect actually the changes around the surrounding continents. So the moisture transport by cyclones, and then changing the mid-latitudinal jet and making the precipitation actually over Europe, but also actually the changes are extremely critical. Now, I said in my very beginning of this talk actually that this will be a high-resolution product, 40-year high-resolution product, and I ask now, why the mesoscale? Because why are not happy about the reanalysis which are provided by the global meteorological centers like MERA, ERA interim, whatever, ERA 5. In fact, to demonstrate that the major mechanism which engaging the interaction between the ocean and the atmosphere, you have to go to the scales which are shown on these diagrams. And these are scales of about few kilometers and sometimes few tenths of minutes or few hours. And these scales are not described well, actually not resolved, even in global reanalysis at the present time. The second thing actually is that on these scales, you may not necessarily solve the 2 equations, which are Navier-Stokes equation, and the third one, which is hydrostatic. You can switch to 3 equations and compute the non-hydrostatic motions actually in the vertical. And for this reason, for this area, covering the North Atlantic, basically from the equator nearly to 80 north, we derived what we call the NAAT, which is North Atlantic atmospheric downscaling. And with configuring with atmospheric weather research and forecasting model, in 2 resolutions, because we have to have something to reference, like 77 kilometers for reference and 14 kilometers for very high resolution with 50 levels in vertical, with more or less, okay, the same configurations for the model, for burst models, actually in high res, which is high resolution, low res, and low resolution, to make this simulation. And we did this for this domain from 79 to 2019, but in fact, okay, it's running further. And currently for the 3-dimensional atmosphere, we have about 1 hourly, in fact, one hourly data set with such a resolution, but also with such a resolution as well for reference. And some model configuration details are shown here. Okay, I will skip this. The important thing is for instance, here, what to do on these boundaries, because when you run the global model, you don't have this problem, in fact, but here you have it, what to do with these lateral conditions. And with lateral conditions, what we have done, we applied, and this is generally accepted actually thing, we applied the nudging, and nudging helps you actually to adjust your model solution to the boundary conditions which you put on the boundary, on the lateral boundaries. And these solutions were taken by placing in boundaries ERA interim. We are switching now to ERA 5. And we nudged in a spectral way, actually filtering for all nudging effects for 1100 kilometers. And doing this higher than PBL, so which is planetary boundary layer. And this nudging effect is shown here, and it indeed helps us to replace what is used in reanalysis as data assimilation, because data assimilation is basically described as the same equation. And this makes us capable of, in fact, following more or less, okay, the global reanalysis, but remaining the system fully prognostic, at least within the interboundary layer and at least within the scales which are designated to the mesoscale. And now I'll show you a few results on the validation of NOD. First of all, for surface fields, because we will be speaking further about the ocean. These are surface winds and fluxes. You see that this is, for instance, difference between now high res and low res of our simulations, and you see differences here. This is the difference with ERA interim, where more cooling here, where more warmer in the subtropical, in the subtropics, in the trade wind zone. And this is the difference with Arctic system reanalysis, which is more or less okay comparable product to us, but just for the Arctic, and it takes only this area in the North Atlantic, and we're again a little bit cooler here with respect to ISR, which is good, in fact, because they reported this as a bias. And also, if you look onto the wind, particularly in this area, you see that in this very active, actually active in terms of mesoscale area, we have much more stronger winds, and I will show this again actually later on different slides. And this is also a good achievement because we can resolve here really very strong variability and very extreme events associated with surface winds. Fluxes. Fluxes are also critically important because actually fluxes is what provides a diabatic exchange between the ocean and the atmosphere and its surface layer. And here's actually how mean fluxes look like and how extreme fluxes look like. Extreme means fluxes corresponding to about 99, so something 99.9 percentile. And you see that we have higher mean fluxes, and specifically we have higher mean fluxes with respect to reanalysis and with respect to low resolution in the western boundary currents, and also here in this western boundary currents, because this is Eastern Greenland current, Western Greenland current, this Labrador current actually, and especially we have very high differences, very strong differences with respect to reanalysis for extreme fluxes. And this is well shown here when we diagnose polar lows actually. These are very small, highly detectable actually in reanalysis, at least in old generation reanalysis, atmospheric transients. And you see that we have heat flux in high res here being estimated on the level of about near to 1,000 actually watts per square meter. And in fact, this is more or less close to ERA 5, but in fact, this comparison cannot be direct because actually ERA 5 uses a little bit different flux parameterization, but this is definitely higher than in ISR and in ERA interim. Now cyclones. Cyclones, this is exactly what has been demonstrated actually in this map plot to bring the signal to the atmosphere. So how do we resolve these cyclones is also very important. And here's the dynamics of cyclones, and this is the total number of cyclones over the domain. And you see that we are again very good to ERA 5, which is in fact 27-kilometer resolution, just twice as coarse compared to others. And deep cyclones are also in a good agreement, but how this huge difference comes actually from which effect? This difference comes from the medium intensity cyclones and shallow cyclones. In fact, smaller transients, which are not resolved in all these numerous reanalyses like Yera, Interim, and Sepsi, FSR, Jira, 55, they're all smaller in actually counting the shallow and small cyclones. Hydrological cycle. Hydrological cycle is also very important because hydrological cycle provides you actually the metrics of the cycling of water in the atmosphere and the moisture transports, which are actually associated with these cyclones. And you see the snapshots of precipitation for just 1 month. I'm very sorry it's not written here, but these are summer months for 2015, I guess. And what we demonstrate here with our high resolution simulations that we show the structure of precipitation over the Gulf Stream, which is quite close to GPM, which is global precipitation mission, satellite global precipitation mission, and which is the best at present product, and which is much better than low resolution or even better than the old GPCP satellite product. And this picture, which I like very much, actually, is this 3 years of seasonal cycle, because GPM exists only for 3 years, and GPM is given here magenta and high-res in red. And you see how good we are actually in the resolving seasonal cycle compared to the other products, and that we are in fact much better than Yera Interim and Yera 5, which tend actually to overestimate precipitation, especially during the summer months. And now let me just move to what happens with this hydrological cycle. Happens that, okay, the moisture coming to the atmosphere, this is why it's called latent flux, is transported through the North Atlantic, transported mostly by the conveyor belts, actually by just cyclones in the series, and provides actually precipitation over the bands of this transport. And these bands are called the atmospheric rivers. This is what is written actually in the top of this slide. And these atmospheric rivers, they're narrow bands. In fact, this is relatively new for the North Atlantic, because in former time it was studied mostly for the North Pacific, actually. It's called Pineapple Express, because they're distributing and transporting the moisture actually from Hawaii Islands to California. But now we study this in the North Atlantic, and this product is the only which provides an option actually to effectively quantify actually the effect of atmospheric rivers. And you see this how these atmospheric rivers are presented in different products. And this is in GPM, and this is in high-res reanalysis, and this is our NAD system, and this is really very good. And here you see the landfall onto over this area, actually here and here, where actually the amount of precipitation falling on the land of Europe starts to be exceeding about 20 to 50 millimeters per day. And the color here, according to this scale, shows actually, I can even enlarge this, shows actually the percentages with which actually atmospheric rivers fall over the whole Europe over the last 40 years. And here is an animation actually how this atmospheric river is formed on your left, and on your right you see the associated precipitation. And you see that this is really narrow band, but narrow band with discharge, if we can use this term discharge actually, which is comparable to big rivers actually. To some extent, it's 1/3 of the Volga River discharge. Well, now I go again to mesocyclones and show you that mesoscale is especially working effectively here. And you see how accurate we are in capturing all these mesocyclones. This is a mesocyclone polar laws, a polar mesocyclone database created by Korsland in 2011. In 20 of 21 Korsland polar cyclones, polar laws, were captured by our North Atlantic atmospheric downscaling, except for one. And here you see how effective we are and how strong the geostrophic part is, because actually in all non-hydrostatic formulations, actually this geostrophic part cannot be effectively captured. And indeed, green shows the criterion of this mesoscale and shows more or less okay, where we do expect the effect of mesoscale. And you see that this is really subpolar North Atlantic, where this critical important processes are going on the boundary between the ocean and the atmosphere. Okay, I can skip this one. And now I will briefly show you why we have derived this just besides the task which can be poorly resolved in the 3D atmosphere. We wanted to also model ocean waves, and we wanted also to model ocean dynamics. And for this reason, okay, we don't have yet the couplet configuration, but we applied not boundary conditions on the top to non-stop simulation of the NEMA model with 112-degree resolution, 40 years. Currently, it's running in a different resolution, and also for wave modeling with WaveWatch 3 model. And here I show you the dynamics of waves. This is significant wave height in high-res experiment. And this is the difference between high-res and low-res experiment. Low-res may be a reference actually for reanalysis, and indeed the effect, where you have the effect, it's exactly this place. And you see that over years, the red lines, actually this is high-res extremes, and mean waves, they're 20 to sometimes 25% higher than in low resolution. And this effect also present and is persistent actually in the subtropics, but just okay, being not as visible and as important. Considering ocean, what do we see in the ocean? So first, we're capable of very accurate simulating of ocean heat content and sea surface temperature, which is shown here. And we see how ocean heat content is changing and how it is growing on in this area. This is integral over the area. And also important is when you do high resolution, and this is this brown line compared to this magenta line, you a little bit change the temperature and your estimates start to be a little bit warmer, and this is very much important, and this is a little bit cooler, and this is very much important. This is very much consistent actually with what we have from the observations. This what oceanic global analysis are suffering from, in fact, and also global models are suffering from. And here you see that high resolution is drastically changing actually our representation of the ocean mix depths. And ocean mix light depths is exactly the metric which explains you and quantifies actually the intensity of this convection, which I have shown on the first slide. And you see that these brown lines, and these are brown lines, and this is months is about 1/3 of the year, where the dynamics of ocean mix layer is doing the most important job actually, deepening and convecting. This is very different from the magenta lines, even here actually in bad year and a good year. And so we are more capable of simulating convection for the ocean. So these are most things I wanted just to present in this very short presentation. So we are very realistic in representation of major phenomena. We are much better in representation of mesoscale dependent phenomena. We have ocean applications which still need to be developed. And importantly is that all data are freely available. And importantly is that in our plans to keep NOAA alive with annual updates, we are already working on NOAA 2 or NOAA 2.0, which will be FAC 6 kilometer resolution. ERA 5 actually, sorry, I didn't put 5 here, will be in place of ERA interim. And we will likely use finite differences instead of finite elements model, exactly how it's shown here. Finite differences actually, finite elements open actually an option to really do more things and to refine model exactly here where we see this mesoscale. And we are also working as a culprit ocean waves and atmosphere configuration for this grid. Actually, it will be improved. It will cover the whole Europe, east to Ural Mountains, and I hope this will be in the next 2-3 years. Actually, will be provided with potentially 160, so 1 kilometer resolution. Virtually, it's up to 200 meters actually here somewhere, and 9 kilometer atmosphere probably. We have already runs for 3 years, but I think this is a future actually, the whole regional model. IDNAD is freely available, 6 terabytes of data, FTP and OpenDAP. There's a publication reference. The publication will go to this website. You can directly download the data. It's free. And also, thanks to organizers, they placed the title professor in front of everyone who was responsible for this book. I'm very proud about this, but in fact, you have to be aware that that was done by very young people, And not all, but some of these very young people, you can see on this photo on the right, bottom right, actually, on this slide. Thank you very much indeed. Thanks a lot.
Thank you very much. So now we come to the last speaker, and Professor Sarah Top, and from Belgium. Professor Top, please.
Thank you very much for the nice introduction. I'm very glad to get the opportunity to present this online conference as an early career scientist and as a representative of the AFTER Consortium. Today, I will present you the AFTER project that investigated the impact of climate change and changes in climate extremes on agriculture and forestry. First, I will introduce you how the AFTER Consortium was created and what we have realized up to now. And then after this, I will tell you all the details about our online stakeholder meeting that will take place at the end of May or the beginning of June. So to start with, this project was funded by the Erasmus Plus program that fosters cooperation between the European Union member states, Russia and Turkey. The institutes whereof the AFTER Consortium consists are listed here at the bottom of the slide, and these institutes are located in a European Union member state, Russia or Turkey, and the researchers of these institutes worked closely together during the complete project to fulfill the final goal of the project. The final goal of the project was to create high-resolution data over the Cortex Central Asia domain and to apply this data directly in impact studies about agriculture and forestry. In this way, the consortium wanted to bridge the usability gap between the state-of-the-art regional climate information and the demand for information at regional scale for climate change impact assessment and adaptation. Because of all these different topics, an interdisciplinary approach was needed, and collaboration between the groups that are specialized in regional climate modeling, extreme value analysis, modeling of crops and forestry, and providing climate services was needed. As you can see on the figure, the Cortex Central Asia domain covers Central Asia, the Tibetan Plateau, but also East Europe, and Turkey and most of Russia. And more concrete, the AFTER project focused mainly on the impacts of climate change and extremes on agriculture and forestry in this Europe, Russia, Turkey region to inform stakeholders in this region. An overview of the main aims of the project can be found in the publication mentioned here on the slide. But several data that was produced within this project, such as the climate data and the methods we used, are also applicable over the complete Central Asian domain. So what did we realize within the After Consortium? Well, first of all, 2 regional climate models, Alaro and RIMO, were run over the Cordex Central Asia domain and provided climate data over Central Asia at 25 kilometer resolution. And this Central Asia domain is described as Region 8 according to the Coordinated Regional Climate Downscaling Experiment Guidelines. And in short, this is called the Cordex Guidelines. And the climate runs were also performed according this Cordex protocol. And in order to evaluate our climate runs, we ran both models, thus an ensemble, coupled with the ERA interim reanalysis for the historical period from 1980 to 2017. And all our detailed findings were written down in an article which is currently in press in the Journal of Geoscientific Model Development, and this will be published soon. So there you can find all the information about the evaluation runs. And further, we investigated also the climate impact. This was done by driving the regional climate models with different global climate models. And this was done also for different emission scenarios as listed here on the slides. Both RCMs were run for the 2.6 and the 8.5 scenario, and Alaro was also run for the 4.5 scenario. And the historical 30-year reference period was taken from 1976 to 2005, and future projections go up to the end of the century. On the figure, you can see how temperature will increase over a subregion West Siberia, which is a subregion within the large Cordex Central Asia domain we chose. And different colors are used for each GCM RCM configuration, and the dotted lines symbolize the RCP 2.6 scenario, and the fill lines symbolize the 8.5 scenario. And as expected, the temperature increases over time, but with the RCP 2.6 scenario, this increase is limited to 2 degrees over this region, while it goes up to 8 degrees for one particular GCM-RCM combination for RCP 8.5. Similar graphs were also made for other variables such as precipitation and also different subregions such as East Europe and the Tibetan Plateau were investigated. But we did not only investigate the time evolution for the complete Central Asia domain and several subregions, we also had a look at the spatial variability in the climate signal. On the first row of this figure, you see the average temperature over the historical periods. And in the first column, you see the temperature values for the annual mean, followed by the different seasons in the other columns. In the second row, you see the spatial distribution of the warming temperatures under a 1.5 global warming under the RCP 2.6 scenario. So we took the 30-year time slice, and then we distracted the temperature of the future scenario minus the historical period, and then we see the warming. And the third row shows the spatial distribution of warming temperatures under the 1.5 global warming, but then under the RCP 8.5 scenario. So here we see actually that both emission scenarios show similar spatial patterns in temperature rise, but don't be confused, because both represent the time slices of a 1.5 degree warming. And this time is in different periods for the different emission scenarios. The 1.5 limit is reached earlier in time under the RCP 8.5 scenario with higher emissions. And in these figures, the light red color that almost covers the whole domain stands for a 1 to 2 degree warming. And in the north, there is 2 to 3 degree warming. And this reaches even 5 or more degrees in winter under the 1.5 global warming. So in the northern part of the domain, we expect a more rapidly increase of temperature under the global warming. And we also looked at the 2 degree warming and the 3 degree warming under the RCP 8.5 scenario. But yeah, we hope we're not reaching these values because yeah, there is a huge warming trend, and the different future projections under the different scenarios show us this, the higher increase in temperature over the northern Russia region for all the different scenarios we did. And also there is a temperature increase that is more prominent during winter and autumn compared to spring and summer over most parts of the domain according to our models. Also here, we investigated other variables, their special distribution, but I will move on to some other interesting data we have produced within the project. We namely produced bias adjustment datasets for all 4 global and regional climate model configurations, and this for the complete period, so from 1975 to the end of the century. And this was done to help impact modelers who are maybe not that familiar with the bias adjustment, or for impact modelers who do not have the computing resources or the time to do this bias adjustment. But yeah, now we have all those climate data, but how will our ecosystems evolve in the future? We know that extremes such as droughts and heat waves will occur more often, but which regions are more vulnerable, and which effect will this have on the crop production and biomass production of forests in the future? Well, for this, we also investigated extreme events such as heat waves and droughts. Here you can see an example of how a meteorological drought will increase by the end of the century, mainly during summer, and especially in the southwestern part of the domain. It's getting very dry in summer, and also in the northern part of China, we expect a drying trend, and especially for the summer. We also calculated drought indices such as the SPI and SPEI, who are linked to evapotranspiration, and many other evapotranspiration and aridity indices were calculated and are listed here on the slide. And they are important for the impact studies. And now I come to those impact studies. We already published several articles, so I consider if you're interested, you can go to those articles and read them. And one of these articles was written in collaboration with the CIEC University in China in the light of the Sino-Belgian Joint Laboratory for Geoinformation. And also these impact studies are still going on, so more publications will follow. The figure on this slide is taken from the article Wheat Yield Estimation from the NDVI and Regional Climate Models in Latvia. And it describes the relationship between the modeled maximum temperatures in July and January, which are important for the growth of the crops, and the wheat yield. Moreover, we used the community Earth system model to predict the biomass production over the Central Asia Cortex domain. And with these impact studies, which are taking into account different climate scenarios, we want to help governments and organizations to enable the formulation of adaptation and mitigation strategies for agriculture and forestry. But of course, we have what we have initiated does not have to be limited to agriculture and forestry. And we are sure it can also be used for a broader range of research applications. For example, it can also be taken into account in the health sector for biodiversity studies, environmental studies, etc. And this brings me actually to the last point of my presentation. Some of you might be interested in using our high resolution climate data for other applications, or might be interested in data about the extremes or data of our impact studies. And this is why we will hold online events on this after project with more information about how to consult and use the data, because the data or most of the data will be freely available as well, and some is already freely available. And we will talk about this the last week of May or the first week of June. The day still has to be confirmed. And by holding this event, we actually want to avoid duplication of effort and share our data and knowledge. And the After Consortium would be very delighted to get in touch with stakeholders in other countries which are covered by the Cortex Central Asia domain. So if you're interested, do not hesitate to contact me by email so I can invite you to the meeting and send you the meeting link. Or if you want to discuss something I presented today, you're also very welcome to send me an email. And to end with, we also have a project website, which we update now and then. So you can always keep an eye on this to be updated about the work we did. And for now, I would like to thank you for your attention, and thank you very much for the invitation to speak here today, and see you hopefully back on the events of the After project. Thank you very much.
So as a chair for this afternoon, I do want to take the liberty to end this discussion. And we have 2 afternoons, wonderful presentation discussions. And yesterday is really the climate change in hot areas and hot zones. And today is really climate change and solutions. Obviously that we need more solutions to address very complicated global challenges like the climate change. And I do have a lot of reflections, but in the interest of time, I don't want to go, one by one, at least from the ANSO perspective. So I would seek opinions and suggestions from our speakers, from the audience, what ANSO can do more to advance of understanding and to provide the science basis to address the problems. At this particular moment, I'm reminded by new stem cells in a common, and so can be a unifying platform to promote some of the big science. But I don't know whether we're able to do it, but I think that sounds to be a very attractive one. We can select, limited topics to launch some, international big science initiatives. I'm not so sure, but that's the way to go. And also, I'm reminded that this global challenge needs global partnerships and global solutions. And we human beings are on the same boat facing climate change. So countries rich and poor all have responsibilities, though under the common and differentiated responsibilities. The rich nations who help the poor, and together we can achieve some sort of national determined strategies and plans to look after our Mother Earth, the only Mother Earth we have. So with that, I do want to thank the Russian Academy of Sciences for the leadership and coordination for this wonderful, stimulating, presentation and discussion, and also to all the speakers for your, wisdom and stimulating ideas and the audience. Thank you so much. If you have good suggestions, do send to the ANSO secretary. Thank you. Look forward to see you at next occasion. Thank you very much. 好了 ，Thank you, thank you.